Mr. Speaker, it's been a good start to seeding for the farmers in southwest Saskatchewan. And what do they get as a thank you from the Prime Minister this year for being the most sustainable and innovative farmers in the world? Carbon tax 2.0. The Liberals are bringing in fuel regulations that are going to gouge producers and consumers above and beyond the first carbon tax, which they're still going to triple. Now, we already know that the first carbon tax has caused the price of food to go up. So how much more are Canadians going to have to pay after the Prime Minister puts in the second carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've cleared out the fact that the Conservative Party of Canada had committed to put in place a low-carbon fuel standard during the last election campaign. But let's talk about what the farmers are saying. The Dairy Farmers of Canada has committed the dairy farm sector to reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, Mr. Speaker. The Egg Farmers of Canada have announced a commitment to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, Mr. Speaker. So the farming sector knows very well how climate change is impacting them. It seems that the only one who don't know about this is the Conservative Party of Canada.
Catherine Caledon.
It's incredible. He actually doesn't know how food ends up on his plate. The farmer pays a carbon tax. The truck that picks up the farmer's food pays a carbon tax to take to the processor. The processor pays a carbon tax. The truck that picks it up from the processor to take it to the grocery store pays a carbon tax. The grocery store pays a carbon tax. And then Canadians can't pay for food. When will this partisan hack Finance Minister finally understand that carbon tax causes inflation?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take the opportunity, if I may, just to answer this question by giving the members an update on the situation that's going on across Western Canada. There are currently 209 wildfires burning in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, 75 of which are out of control. Mostly hot, dry, and windy conditions in the next week will continue to exacerbate for those communities. Mr. Speaker, there are close to 30,000...
Let me interrupt for a second. It's just getting rowdy and noisy again. I just have the impression I'm at a frat house party or something. Please, keep it down on both sides. Please. Okay, I'm getting tired of this one. Enough. The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take the opportunity to speak about the situation that Canadians are facing, particularly across Western Canada, where there are 209 wildfires burning, 75 of which are burning out of control. Unfortunately, mostly hot, dry, windy conditions over the next week will exacerbate the situation, and shifting winds have pushed smoke across the country, impacting a number of urban communities, Calgary and Winnipeg in particular. Mr. Speaker, close to 30,000 Canadians have been evacuated from their communities, and the Government of Canada is there for those Canadians. We've deployed Canadian Armed Forces resources, the Canadian Red Cross, additional police resources, and together we will be there for the people of Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan through this very difficult time.
Member for Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, it's incredibly disappointing to see the minister politicizing these disasters for his own gain. The fact of the matter is, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are struggling like never before as the cost of government is driving up the cost of living, and people are struggling to afford gas, groceries, and home heating. Now they're planning a 41-cent a litre tax on gas, as well as a second carbon tax, which people in Northern Ontario cannot afford, Mr. Speaker, though they have little choice but to pay. So when will this Finance Minister finally scrap the failed carbon tax scam?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what is unfortunate is that the Conservative Party fails to see a link between climate change and the impact on the economy, that they fail to see extreme weather events as being an existential threat to this planet, that they think that they can bury their head in the sand and forget that climate change exists and think that there will be an economy for anybody. Mr. Speaker, if we want to have a planet, we must take action on climate, and we are doing that while making sure that life is more affordable for Canadians, and we will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, these Liberals have missed every single environmental target that they have created, let alone these Liberals have increased the carbon tax. We know there's carbon tax 2.0. How high does the carbon tax have to go so that this government can stop blaming they want to triple the carbon tax to prevent forest fires and hurricanes? How much does this carbon tax 2.0 have to go up?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the first people who have to pay for climate change is farmers when they have to deal with droughts like they did in the West and flooding 2 years ago in BC, a hurricane like there was in the Atlantic a little over a year ago. Mr. Speaker, they're the first ones affected, and that's why we have a program to manage risks. We have programs for the environment to help farms be more resilient.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives warned that the costly Coalition's carbon tax would make everything more expensive, and today Canadians can't afford the basics and they have to choose between heating, eating and housing. Glenn from Athabasca says his heating bill is double from last year and a quarter of it was carbon tax. The Liberals' April carbon tax hike already added 14 cents a litre to gas and spiked inflation. After 8 years, the truth is these Liberals are out of touch and Canadians are out of money. So why won't the costly Coalition axe their carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we're in mid-May and already we're seeing record forest fires in northern Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in British Columbia. I've talked to people in Calgary who say they can't breathe because of the forest fires in northern Alberta. Our plan to fight climate change is working, Mr. Speaker. We've reduced carbon pollution by 50 million tons. What's the answer of the Conservative Party? Make pollution free again. Make climate change and forest fires worse. That's not how we'll do it on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
For Lakeland.
But of course, the carbon tax hasn't reduced emissions, and 80% of Canadians pay more than they'll ever get back. However, the Liberals did admit that their carbon tax is meant to make driving more expensive. So they plan to triple those costs, and what are they going to do? They're going to kick Canadians while they're down and add a second carbon tax. Together, those taxes will cost struggling Canadians 60 cents a litre more at the pumps. Did this costly Coalition partisan hacks even know or care how much more gas, groceries, and home heating is going to cost struggling Canadians under their carbon tax? And do they really think Canadians can afford thousands more?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to read from the Conservative platform of the last election, page 79, a section called Low Carbon Fuel Standard. Will finalize and improve the clean fuel regulations to reduce carbon emissions from every litre of gasoline and other liquid fuels we burn, turning them into true carbon fuel standard. Mr. Speaker, the difference between the Conservative Party and us, they're all talk, we're all about action, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
The Liberal NDP Carbon Tax Coalition is making life unaffordable for Canadians. And what they don't understand is there are very real and very painful consequences when you hike the carbon tax. When the Liberals triple their carbon tax, the price of fuel per litre goes up 41 cents. The cost of food goes up 34%. And the average that a Canadian farm family is going to pay in carbon taxes is $150,000 a year. Sounds kind of bad, right? But wait, you ain't seen nothing yet. The Prime Minister is going to add a second carbon tax on Canadians, this time with no rebate. How much is this new carbon tax scam going to cost Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member for Foothills surely knows, Albertans are getting back more than $1,000. That goes directly to the pockets of Alberta families. And you know what else, Mr. Speaker? I was in Edmonton and Calgary recently, and I met a great young woman. Her name is Kyla. She teaches people how to weld. And she said to me that we need a plan, an economic plan for the green economy. She understands that's where her job is going to be. That's where the job of the apprentices she's training is going to be. Albertans get that, Mr. Speaker. It's only the Conservatives who don't.
Honourable Member for Foothills.
The NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition is forcing Canadians to make a choice. Either food on the table or a roof over my heads. The carbon tax punishes families, it punishes farmers, it punishes small businesses who are all struggling to make ends meet. And for what? They haven't met a single emissions target that the Liberals have set. Instead of admitting that their carbon tax scam is a failure, they are doubling down with a second carbon tax, this time with no rebates. How much is gas and groceries going to cost Canadian families when they implement their new carbon tax scam? How much?
L'honorable ministre de l'Agriculture.
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell you that the first people impacted by climate change are our farmers. They are highly committed to fighting climate change, reducing emissions. Our program to help them adopt best practices and acquire new technologies and the innovation program are, as we say, something we all want to subscribe to. It demonstrates their interest and will continue to work hard to reduce our emissions and fight climate change.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. With this Prime Minister, everything costs more, and now inflation is back with a vengeance, a 9.1% increase in food prices over last year. The Bank of Canada could even raise interest rates again. Nothing to reassure Canadians. But this Prime Minister is doubling down. He wants to go ahead with other inflationary policies like his carbon tax. When will he drop his disastrous plan for Canadians? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've already said a number of times here, Quebec has its own system for pricing pollution, which is different from Canada's. It's a cap-and-trade system. And I'd be happy to explain to my Quebec colleague how that system works. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, this government is driving up the cost of food production by making farmers pay the carbon tax and a 35% tariff on fertilizers. Our family farms are at the end of their rope. The minister keeps telling farmers to go deeper into debt and says the carbon tax doesn't affect Quebec. I can show the minister invoices that clearly demonstrate the opposite. Not to mention the cost of transporting products between provinces. The government needs to understand the damage they're doing to Canadian farmers and families. When will they finally remove the carbon tax on farmers? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, as my colleague, the Environment Minister, just said, Quebec has its own system, and the price on pollution, the federal price, does not apply in Quebec. Unlike the Conservatives, when they were in office, who cut programs for research and innovation, we are investing in our farmers so that they can adopt better practices, have access to new technologies, and we have increased funding for the Sustainable Agriculture Partnership by 25%.